My family almost lost a $15 million inheritance, all because of one woman. Now I'm going to tell you the whole story. When you've lived as many seasons as I have, you learn a thing or two about secrets. Some are heavy, weighing on you like a wool coat in August, and others sit soft and quiet, like the last golden light before sundown. The inheritance, my inheritance, was both. $15 million tucked away like a letter under a floorboard, gathering not dust but possibility. I never set out to have such a sum, not in my wildest daydreams while folding laundry at midnight or waiting on hold with the gas company. But life, as my mother used to say, gives with one hand and takes with the other. And sometimes, if you're lucky or just stubborn enough, you keep a little extra for yourself. I suppose you want to know how I came by it. I'll tell you the way grandmothers do, slow and roundabout, so the telling itself becomes a kind of shelter. After my husband passed, Lord, it's been 10 years, but his voice still echoes in the hallway on cold mornings. I thought what little we'd put by would keep me, maybe stretch to a grandchild's college fund, a new roof, a pie or two for the church bake sale. He was a planner, my Sam. Not a big talker but steady. You never saw a man so careful with his checkbook or so tender with his heart. He'd grown up hungry in the Depression, saw the way want shapes a man, and swore we'd never go without. When he got sick, there were nights I'd sit by his bed, reading the mail with a flashlight so I wouldn't wake him. Bills mostly. Sympathy cards. But every so often something else. A crisp white envelope, addressed in his neat hand. For when you need it, Marjorie, he'd written on one. Not before. I tucked them away because that's what you do. You keep the faith and keep the secrets until it's time. After the funeral, I sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where we'd celebrated every birthday, patched every argument and planned every Christmas, and started sorting through the mess. I found bank statements, property deeds, and, folded deep inside the pocket of his Sunday suit, a letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, with a name that sounded more like a character from Perry Mason than real life. It was about a trust and a sum so large I thought it was a mistake. I called the number expecting a scam or a misunderstanding, but the man on the other end was real enough. So was the money. Sam had invested quietly year after year, some in stocks, some in land, some in a company that made those little plastic tabs for bread bags. Of all things. And over decades it had grown like a tree left untended, roots everywhere, impossible to dig up now. I didn't breathe a word to anyone. Not my children, not the ladies at church, not even to the banker with the soft hands who always offered me a caramel when I came in. Part of it was habit, I suppose. Part of it was fear. I knew money could be a blessing or a curse, and usually a little of both. I'd seen too many families torn apart by an inheritance, watched good people become strangers over a piece of paper and a line in a will. I didn't want that for Artem, my boy, or for my grandchildren wherever they might be scattered. So I kept the truth locked away, both in the safety deposit box and in my heart. I lived simply. I clipped coupons, wore out my shoes, made soup from the Sunday roast bones just like always. If people wondered why I never asked for help, or how I managed to keep the old house painted and the garden in bloom, they didn't say much. Folks know better than to question a widow's thrift. My life was quiet, if a little lonely, but it was mine. And that money sat silent as a secret, waiting for its moment. I did try to find a way to give it, bit by bit, to causes that mattered. I paid off a neighbor's medical bills one year, anonymously. Sent envelopes of cash tucked in Christmas cards to families who'd lost work at the mill. I donated to the library, the food pantry, the animal shelter. Always quietly, always with my heart pounding, as if someone would catch me in the act and demand to know what right I had to be so generous. But for the most part, the fortune stayed untouched, earning its interest, biding its time. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch in the early evening, the air thick with honeysuckle, and wonder what Sam would think of me, hoarding it, protecting it, when he'd always believed in giving with open hands. But he'd also known the world, and the way people change when money enters the room. And so I guarded it, this strange, shining inheritance. Not just the money but the story of it, the proof that our hard lives had meant something, that all those years of patching and saving had grown into a kind of shield. I told myself it wasn't fear that made me hide it, but love. Love for Artem, who'd always had a soft heart and a trusting nature. Love for the grandchildren I hardly saw. Love, too, for the woman I'd become. Stubborn, careful, and in the end unbreakable. But secrets, like bread left too long on the counter, have a way of going stale. I knew deep in my bones that the day would come when I'd have to reveal it, when the choice would be forced by circumstance or by betrayal. I prayed the way widows do for wisdom. I prayed for strength. I prayed, most of all, that when the day came, I'd know the difference between love and obligation, between trust and naivety. That day, as it happened, was already closer than I realized. There's a kind of magic in a wedding morning. The air buzzes with promise and every old worry hushes itself for a little while, letting hope slip in through the kitchen window with the sunlight. I remember Artem's wedding like it was yesterday, though in truth, the memory is already wearing soft around the edges, like the hem of a well-loved apron. He was my only boy, my miracle after years of waiting and wishing. As a little one, Artem had the gentlest spirit. He'd rescue worms after the rain and carry stray kittens home in his jacket. He had Sam's eyes, steady and kind, but my stubborn jaw. I always said he was born with more tenderness than the world knew what to do with. On his wedding day, I woke early, even before the robins, heart thumping like it does before a thunderstorm. The house felt unusually quiet. I put the coffee on, ironed my best dress. Rose pink with pearl buttons, bought on clearance but still pretty, and pressed a hand to my hair to settle the stray wisps. Sam would have told me to wear something blue for luck, but I thought I'd worn enough blue for a lifetime. Today I wanted to look soft, approachable, the way a mother should look when she's giving her son away. The church was full, a patchwork of faces, friends from Artem's school days, cousins I hadn't seen since the last funeral, and a scattering of the bride's relatives, all trim and proper in their pressed suits and tasteful hats. There was laughter, the kind that bubbles over when people are trying not to cry. Little girls threw flower petals that clung to my shoes. The scent of lilies and old hymnals lingered in the air. Artem stood at the altar, taller than I remembered, jaw tight but eyes shining. When he caught sight of me, his face softened into a little boy grin that nearly undid me. I squeezed his hand a moment before the ceremony. "You look handsome, honey," I whispered. "Your father would be proud." He blinked too fast, nodded, and then turned to wait for his bride. Now about his bride. She was a vision sharp as a tack, clever, with a beauty that snapped your attention. But there was something about her, even that first day, that didn't quite settle right. Maybe it was the way she held herself, too perfectly poised, or the way her eyes flicked to the exits as if she were always half ready to leave. But I told myself not to judge. Love makes all of us awkward in our own way. The ceremony went off without a hitch, all vows and violin music, and the sweet nervousness of two young people stepping into a future together. Afterward, there were photographs in the churchyard, laughter, and endless congratulations. I held my smile until my cheeks ached. At the reception, the tables were set with lace runners and little jars of homemade jam for favors. A nod to my jam, I was told, though I hadn't made these myself. I watched Artem and his wife move from table to table, collecting good wishes and toasts. The room was warm and bright, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface, as subtle as the weather turning before you notice the clouds. Later, while the band played a slow song and most everyone had found their way to the dance floor, the bride, my new daughter-in-law, slipped away from the noise and found me at my table. She sat down, smoothing her dress over her knees. "I hope you're having a good time," she said, her voice sweet as spun sugar but with an undertone I couldn't quite place. "I am," I replied, and it wasn't a lie. There is always joy at a wedding, even if it comes mixed with a little sorrow for what's changing. She leaned in, lowering her voice. I wanted to talk to you about something important. It's about the future, about the family, really. She pulled a small folder from her purse, the color of wet sand, and set it on the table between us. I know it's not exactly a romantic topic on a day like this, but Artem and I have been thinking a lot about security, about protecting the family's assets, planning ahead. My father is an attorney, and he's always said a family trust is the best way to keep things in order. We'd like you to consider naming me as the manager, just to streamline things, take the burden off you. You've done so much already. This would be a kindness to us. She smiled, not unkindly, but with a confidence I'd seen before. In boardrooms and bank offices, in people used to getting their way. I looked at the folder, not touching it. There was a time in my life when the mere mention of paperwork would have sent me reaching for my reading glasses and a strong cup of tea. But this was different. I could feel it. "Oh, honey," I said gently, my voice as soft as I could make it. "That's a thoughtful gesture. But these things take time. I'd like to look it over if you don't mind. I don't move as quickly as I used to." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered. "Of course. Take your time, Marjorie. I just wanted you to know how much we care." She patted my hand and went back to the party, leaving the folder behind. I waited a long while before I opened it. The music and laughter faded into the background. Inside, I found crisp documents, legal language thick as molasses, assigning control of any and all family assets to the new couple, with her as the primary administrator. There were places for signatures, witnesses, notarizations, everything in order. I closed the folder and sat for a moment, listening to the echo of Sam's voice in my head. Trust is earned, not given. And suddenly I knew I was being tested, measured, maybe even watched. After the cake was cut and the last dance spun, I tucked the folder into my purse and drove home alone through the dark. The night was heavy with the smell of lilacs and summer rain. As I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a while, the car ticking in the cooling air. I pressed my hand to my heart, feeling the thud of it, steady, determined. I may have looked like any old widow, tired and sentimental, but inside I was steel. My son's happiness was precious, yes, but my job as his mother wasn't over just because he wore a ring. I'd spent my whole life protecting what mattered, my family, my values, my secrets. And if this was another test, I was ready. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and laid out the folder on the kitchen table. I read every word twice. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I knew what I had to do. If they were watching, let them see. The old woman still had a few tricks left. Sometimes life teaches you to be careful in the same way you learn to handle a hot kettle. Slowly, after one or two burns, when Artem's wife handed me those trust papers, asking me to sign over the family assets with her as manager, I felt that old heat prickle up my arms. It wasn't the first time I'd sensed someone fishing for more than a handshake, but it stung just the same, because this time it was inside my own family. That's when I made my decision. If she wanted documents, I'd give her documents, but not the ones that led to the truth. I spent an afternoon at my kitchen table, drafting a new set of papers with official-sounding titles and numbers, but all of it pointed to a small, simple inheritance. A modest insurance policy. A savings account with just enough to seem believable. Not a breath about the real fortune Sam had left for me. I even dug out an old file folder and a legal pad just to make the whole thing look lived in. I signed my name at the bottom, as neat as my trembling hands allowed, and put it all in a manila envelope. Before I sealed it, I tucked in a polite note. "For your records, as discussed. Marjorie." When she came by, said she was in the neighborhood. I handed it to her without a word of fuss. She smiled like a woman handed a treasure map. I watched her eyes scan the envelope, the way her hands gripped it tight. "Thank you, Marjorie," she said. "You have no idea what this means for our family's future." After she left, I sat in the quiet kitchen and poured myself a cup of tea. It was a strange feeling, half relief, half sorrow. Relief because I knew I protected Sam's legacy. Sorrow because I'd had to. No mother wants to test her own family, but sometimes, sweetheart, you need to know who's reaching for your hand and who's after what's in it. Over the next week, I watched for signs. I noticed Artem getting quieter, more distracted. His wife grew bolder, bringing up my accounts with a little too much familiarity. She hinted at consolidating all the assets, talking as if it was only natural to put everything under her watchful eye. I listened, I nodded, I kept my own counsel. In truth, the trap was set. I had given her the bait, and now all I had to do was wait and watch what she did with it. Sometimes, when you want to see what's truly in a person's heart, you have to step back and let them show you. And oh, she showed me clear as day. That's how it began. This little game of shadows and truths. It wasn't the way I wanted it, but I'd lived too long, and loved too hard, to let someone take what wasn't rightfully theirs. I promised Sam I'd protect our family, and I meant it. Even if I had to do it alone. In my day, a secret might be kept in a diary or behind a loose brick in the fireplace. But now, secrets hide in passwords and little glowing screens. More invisible maybe, but easier to track if you know where to look. I've never trusted computers much. Give me a sturdy padlock or a biscuit tin over a cloud drive any day. But even an old woman learns a few new tricks when she's protecting what matters. It started with Artem's tablet. He left it on my kitchen counter one afternoon. Said he was checking the weather and forgot it when he ran out to the store. I didn't think much of it. Just another blinking thing, covered in fingerprints and crumbs. But later, as I wiped the counter, the screen came alive all on its own. There, plain as daylight, was my email. Open to a message I hadn't written, about account transfers and authorization forms. And the sender? My daughter-in-law. Now, I don't pretend to know the first thing about hacking, but I do know what my words sound like, and those weren't mine. I stood in the quiet kitchen, heart beating in my throat. I scrolled through the sent folder and found more. Messages from my account, asking banks about balances, requesting password resets, all within the last week. Each one sent from Artem's tablet, each one a little bolder than the last. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, a glitch, or maybe a well-meaning mix-up. But then I remembered the way she'd eyed my checkbook, the way she pressed about consolidating accounts, how she barely looked at Artem when she talked about our future. That's when it hit me cold and deep. She hadn't just read those fake documents. She was looking for the real thing, digging through my digital life for a treasure she already believed was there. I felt sick with it, standing alone under my old kitchen light. For a moment I thought about calling Artem, but I stopped myself. He was caught between two loves, his mother and his wife, and that's a hard place for any man to be. No, this was my fight. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the table, and let the facts settle. The evidence was right in front of me. Emails, login alerts, even a new device listed on my bank's security page. All connected to Artem's tablet, which had, it seemed, never really left his wife's purse. Funny how people think an old woman can't keep up. They forget that a life of watching faces and reading intentions teaches you more than any computer ever could. I didn't rage or cry. I just wrote down every detail, dates, times, the wording of each message. If this was her plan, she was leaving muddy footprints everywhere she walked. I changed my passwords that night. Harder than opening a safe, but I managed, choosing words only Sam and I would know, phrases from old letters, the names of childhood pets long gone. I watched the security notifications roll in as she tried and failed to log in again. Each one made my resolve stronger. The next day, when Artem stopped by, I kissed his cheek and asked how married life was treating him. He looked tired, distracted. "Fine, Ma," he said. But I could see the trouble already growing at the edges of his life. Before he left, I pressed his tablet into his hands and looked him in the eyes. "Be careful what you leave behind," I said. He gave a puzzled little smile and hugged me. "That's the thing about family, darling. You hope you can trust them with anything." But sometimes you have to trust your own eyes first. And my eyes told me it was time to gather every scrap of proof, because this was only the beginning. When you've lived long enough, you learn to trust the itch between your shoulder blades, that feeling when something isn't right. I spent that next week watching and waiting, my eyes sharper than they'd been in years. While the world thought I was just puttering in my garden, inside I was busy as a squirrel before winter, collecting every bit of evidence I could find. I started with the tablet, that slippery thing that had become the key to everything. It sat on my kitchen counter like a sleeping cat. Innocuous if you didn't know better. I wrote down every login time, every email sent, and took photos of the suspicious messages. I even copied the device log, where her fingerprints were as clear as day. Password resets, new devices authorized, late-night logins when I was already in bed. I saved all those screenshots to a little USB drive. Artem had given it to me last Christmas, thinking I'd use it for family photos. Well, it held something far more important now. Next, I called the bank. Oh, I know how to be patient on hold, let me tell you. I asked for my account activity, and there it was. Login attempts from locations that weren't mine, failed password tries, even a few requests for statements mailed to an address I didn't recognize. Every conversation with the bank I wrote down in my little notebook, careful and neat, just the way Sam taught me. My hand shook a bit, but my letters were steady. I learned long ago that a paper trail is sometimes the only voice you get when the world stops listening. At night, I combed through my email, checking for forwarding rules, new contacts, anything that felt off. And sure enough, I found rules set to automatically forward some of my financial emails to a hidden account. A trail she must have thought I'd never follow. But she underestimated me. Folks do sometimes when your hair turns silver and your steps get slower. They forget how much you see when you stop rushing. Still, I wasn't angry, not yet. More than anything, I felt the chill of disappointment, cold as the November wind. I thought about all those afternoons teaching Artem to tie his shoes, bandaging skinned knees, sending him into the world with a sandwich and a kiss. It hurt, knowing someone he loved was working so hard to rob us blind. But I set that pain aside. I had work to do. I printed everything, the emails, the logs, the statements. I made copies, tucked them away in my old recipe box, hidden right behind my mother's lemon cake instructions. No one ever looks in the recipe box, darling. That's the safest place in the house. I even called an old friend, someone who'd worked at the county clerk's office for 40 years, just to ask about legal protections. For a friend. She gave me the name of a trustworthy lawyer and said, "Keep your head up, Marjorie. Folks get greedy, but the truth has a way of rising." By the end of that week, I had a thick folder of evidence. Everything lined up, neat as the rows in my vegetable patch. Every lie she'd tried to plant, every trick she'd pulled, it was all there waiting for the right moment. And I'll tell you, that kind of quiet preparation is its own kind of power. While she was plotting in secret, I was laying a foundation as strong as any brick house. There's a lesson in that, honey. Never underestimate a woman with a good memory and a stubborn streak. When the time came, I'd be ready. And I'd do it not just for myself but for Artem, so he'd know the truth no matter how hard it was to see. I don't think there's a lonelier feeling in the world than knowing you have to break your own child's heart to save him. That's what it felt like the morning I decided it was time to lay all my cards on the table. The sky was gray, heavy with rain, and I stood at the window watching the drops trace little rivers down the glass. I thought of all the times Artem had come running in from the rain as a boy, arms wide, trusting me to dry him off and make it all better. I wished I could protect him from this storm too, but some lessons a mother can't soften. I called Artem and asked him to come by. "Just us," I said, as gentle as I could. He heard something in my voice because he arrived early, worry written all over his face. He brought coffee and pastries, trying to keep things light, but I saw his eyes flicker with questions. We sat at the kitchen table, the old one with the scratches and coffee stains that tell the story of our family. I placed the folder of evidence between us, hands folded tight to keep from trembling. I looked at him, really looked at him. My boy grown but still so much the child I'd rocked to sleep. Artem, I said quietly, there's something you need to see. And I need you to listen, even when it's hard. He nodded, uncertain, but didn't speak. I opened the folder, laid out the emails, the bank logs, the printouts, each one lined up like stepping stones across a dark creek. I told him step by step what I'd found. The emails sent from his tablet, the login attempts, the forwarding rules, the requests for my accounts and statements, all traced back to his wife. For a moment he just stared, silent as stone. I watched the realization dawn on him, slow and agonizing. The kind of hurt that comes not from a stranger, but from someone you let into your heart. His face crumpled, the way it did when he was a boy, and scraped his knee, only there was no comfort I could offer this time. He shook his head, tears welling up. No, Ma. She wouldn't, she couldn't. But the evidence was there, undeniable, all the cold, hard facts laid bare on the table where we'd once built gingerbread houses and read bedtime stories. I reached for his hand. I know this is hard, baby. I wish with all my heart it wasn't true. But you deserve the truth even when it hurts. He pulled his hand away, at first angry. At her, at me, at himself for not seeing it sooner. Why didn't you tell me before? He choked out. I needed to be sure, I whispered. I needed you to see with your own eyes. He sat in silence for a long while, shoulders shaking. I just let him be, the way you do with a wounded animal, close enough to help, but giving space for the pain to settle. Finally, he wiped his eyes and looked up at me, broken and clear. What do I do now, Ma? I squeezed his hand. You hold your head up. You remember who you are. And you let me help you get through this. We'll face it together. He nodded just once. The heartbreak was there, sharp as shattered glass, but so was the beginning of understanding. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one that sets you free. And as the rain finally stopped and the sun began to peek through the clouds, I knew we'd taken the first step toward healing, even if the road ahead would be long. No one dreams of a marriage ending, especially not so soon after the cake's been eaten and the last of the thank you cards sent. But there are times in life when holding on does more harm than letting go. That's the lesson I whispered to Artem as we faced the long, painful days that followed the truth. He stayed with me for a while, just a duffel bag and a suit on a hanger, as if he couldn't believe it was really over. He slept on the old couch, the one that sags in the middle, and I brought him tea in the mornings, though most days it went cold beside him. I heard him crying sometimes at night when he thought I was asleep. I didn't interrupt. Grief is a private thing, even between a mother and her son. His wife, soon-to-be ex, tried calling at first. I heard her leave messages, her voice all sugar and thorns. Let's talk about this. You're overreacting. Your mother's confused. But the evidence was ironclad. And when her tone changed to anger, Artem simply turned off the phone. There comes a moment, darling, when the ache turns to steel. And that's when I saw my boy begin to find his backbone again. With the lawyer's help, the same one my friend from the clerk's office recommended, we prepared the annulment papers. There was no fanfare, no scene. Just 3 people in a room with a table and a stack of forms, the air thick with everything unsaid. She tried to argue at first, but the folder of evidence lay between us, quiet and damning. In the end, she signed with a trembling hand, chin lifted as if daring us to say she'd lost. Artem thanked her, voice flat and dignified. I wish things were different, he said. But I can't build a life on a lie. She gathered her things, one last sweep of her expensive handbag, one last glance at the ring on her finger, now loose, and walked out without another word. The door closed softly behind her, but it felt like thunder. Artem let out a breath he'd been holding for months, maybe years. I stood by him, steady as I could, and smoothed his hair the way I used to when he was small. He buried his face in my shoulder and we stood like that for a long time, just breathing, letting the pain pass through us like a storm. There is a strange dignity in loss, honey. A strange, hard-won peace that comes when you finally set down what was never really yours to carry. The annulment wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of my son learning to trust himself again. And maybe, just maybe, to trust me too. That evening I made us soup, simple, hearty, the kind Sam always loved. We ate in silence, but it was a comfortable kind of quiet. I saw a little more of the old Artem in his eyes, tired but clear. When he finished, he set his spoon down and reached for my hand. "Thank you, Ma," he whispered. I squeezed back, my heart aching with both sorrow and relief. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. That's what mothers do. We hold the light until you find your way back." And as the night settled around our little kitchen, I knew we'd survive the worst of it together. The road ahead would still be rough, but we'd walk it side by side. Each of us a little scarred, but a little wiser too. The house is different after heartbreak. Even when it's not your own, there's a heaviness to the air, as if every sigh and footstep echoes just a little louder. Artem stayed a while after the annulment, moving through the rooms like a ghost. Gentle, polite, careful not to ask for too much. I let him. Sometimes all a person needs is to know they're welcome, even if the words are never spoken out loud. But when he was asleep or out for a walk, that's when the grief crept in. Not the sharp kind you get after a fresh wound, but the deep, aching sorrow of a mother who couldn't protect her child from life's cruelties. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, remembering nights I'd rocked him through fevers, schoolyard heartbreaks, and all the little sorrows of growing up. This hurt was different, older somehow, and lonelier. Most nights I'd wander into the bedroom I'd shared with Sam. His side of the closet still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and his shoes waited under the bed as if he might come home any minute. I'd press my palm to his pillow, wishing for his comfort, remembering how he'd wrap his arms around me and whisper, "It'll pass, Marjorie. It always does." Oh, how I missed him then. The world felt sharper without someone to lean on, especially when carrying someone else's grief along with my own. Some evenings when Artem was out of sight, I'd take out the old photo albums, our family vacations, birthdays, Artem's first day of school. There he was, grinning at the camera, eyes bright with trust. My chest would ache with the memory of who he'd been before the world taught him to be wary. That's what loss does, darling. It changes the shape of your heart, makes it softer in some places and tougher in others. It wasn't just Artem's heartbreak I mourned. It was the loss of my own certainty, that a mother's love was enough to shield her child, that the world would always be kind if you were good. Life teaches us otherwise, but that lesson never gets easier. Sometimes I found myself talking to Sam's picture, telling him about the days, how strong Artem had been, how much it hurt to watch him hurt. "I hope I did right by him," I'd whisper. "I hope you're proud." But even in the darkest moments, there was a stubborn flicker of hope. I saw it in the way Artem still said, "Good night, Ma," before bed, or how he lingered over his coffee in the mornings, as if he wasn't quite ready to face the world alone. There is a healing that comes from simply being present, from sharing the silence and the slow return of trust. And so, night after night, I kept the porch light on. I left an extra blanket folded at the end of his bed. I made soup, cleaned, and wrote little notes. "Thinking of you. I'm proud of you." And tucked them where he might find them. I grieved, yes, but I also loved fiercely and without question. That's what mothers do after all. We carry on, even with our hearts in pieces, hoping our love is enough to help our children heal. Grief, when it finally lets go, does so quietly, like a storm that passes in the night, leaving the world washed and strange in the morning. For days after the annulment, Artem moved through the house in silence, a little lost, a little ashamed, the weight of betrayal pressing his shoulders down. I didn't push. Sometimes a person needs space to come back to themselves. But little by little, something shifted. I'd find him sitting at the kitchen table with my old photo albums, thumbing through the pages as if searching for an answer. Once I caught him reading one of Sam's old journals, his brow furrowed, his lips moving silently over the words. He started taking longer walks in the evenings, sometimes coming home with a loaf of bread from the corner bakery or a bouquet of daisies, just because. He even began to talk again, first about little things, the weather, a funny story from work, a neighbor's new puppy. Then, slowly, the harder truths. One afternoon he came into the kitchen while I was peeling apples for a pie. He stood there a long time, twisting his wedding ring in his fingers, staring at the floor. Finally he spoke, voice rough with regret. "Ma, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I should have listened to you, trusted you." His voice broke then, tears spilling over, the kind that come from deep inside. I wiped my hands on my apron and took him in my arms, just like when he was a little boy. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "There's nothing to forgive. We all want to believe the best in the people we love. You trusted her because your heart is good, not because you're foolish." He held on tight, trembling with relief and shame and something like gratitude. "You saved me, Ma. You really did." "No, darling," I said softly. "You saved yourself. You opened your eyes. That's the hardest thing in the world to do." After that day, Artem began to rebuild, one small act at a time. He cleared out the last of his wife's things, boxed up the wedding china, and quietly returned her calls, not to argue but to say goodbye. He joined me for evening tea, asked about my stories, even started reading the newspaper with me in the mornings. Sometimes we sat in the garden, saying nothing at all, just listening to the birds and the wind in the trees. That kind of silence is its own kind of healing. I could see the man Sam and I had raised shining through again. Older now, wiser, maybe a little scarred but whole. He started to laugh again, that deep, honest laugh I hadn't heard in years. He even began making plans, talking about travel, about work, about fixing up the old shed in the backyard. I let him dream, and I dreamed with him, quietly hopeful. Artem's awakening wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a slow, steady thaw, the kind that happens when love and truth finally have room to breathe. And as I watched my son come back to himself, I felt something inside me begin to heal too. We can't protect our children from every sorrow, sweetheart. But we can hold them close, shine a light through the darkness, and walk beside them as they find their way home. Healing isn't a sudden thing. It comes in drips and murmurs, like a leaky faucet you almost get used to. That's how it was with Artem and me in those first weeks after the storm had passed. We moved slow, tiptoeing around old hurts, careful not to say too much or too little, as if the house itself was listening. But you know, trust, once cracked, can mend stronger than before if you're willing to do the work. And so we did, in small ways. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd find Artem sitting at the kitchen table, turning a mug of tea in his hands. I'd sit beside him, pour myself a cup, and let the steam do the talking for a while. One night he broke the silence. "Ma, did you ever doubt me?" His voice was almost a whisper. I reached across the table, covered his hand with mine. "I doubted her, not you," I said. "But sometimes a mother's job is to wait until her child can see what she already knows. I never stopped loving you, not for a second." We really talked for the first time in years. About Sam and the lessons he'd left us. About being careful, yes, but also about not letting bitterness take root in the garden of your heart. We spoke about mistakes, about forgiveness, about the way love can survive even disappointment, if you keep showing up for each other. I watched Artem soften a little each day, the way bread dough gives under a warm hand. He started teasing me again, calling me the world's nosiest mother. And I pretended to be offended, but my heart sang with relief. We found comfort in our routines, folding laundry together, mending socks, making soup on Sunday afternoons. The ordinary tasks became our way back to each other. Some evenings we took our tea out to the porch and listened to the crickets, our conversation gentle and meandering. He asked about my childhood, and I told him stories I hadn't thought of in years, about canning peaches with my mother, about walking home from school in the snow, About Sam's proposal under the old oak tree. Artem listened, truly listened, and that's how I knew we were healing. He began to trust himself again, too. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom without asking for help, cooked me an omelet that was more shell than egg, and laughed about it when I made a face. He started making plans for the future, traveling, maybe going back to school, starting fresh. I could see the light returning to his eyes, brightening a little more with every passing day. Rebuilding trust takes time, honey. It takes 1,000 little moments of kindness, 1,000 gentle reassurances. But when it's real, when it's earned, it's a thing of quiet beauty. It means you can sit across from someone you love and know deep in your bones that you're safe. And as summer slipped into autumn, I realized we'd made it through the worst of the storm. Our hearts were still patched and tender, but they beat steady, side by side, mother and son, forging a new beginning out of all that had been lost. People always think an inheritance is about money, dollars and cents, checks and signatures, the kind of things that make banks sit up and take notice. But as I sat across from Artem at our kitchen table, watching the golden afternoon spill through the window, I realized the real inheritance had nothing to do with numbers on a ledger. We were folding towels together. Nothing fancy, just the soft blue ones I'd had since Sam was alive. When Artem paused, holding a towel to his chest. "Ma," he said quietly, "I know you've been keeping something from me. But after everything we've been through, I think I finally understand. It's not about the money, is it?" I smiled, feeling the truth rise up in me like a hymn. "No, honey. It never was. Money can fix a roof or pay a doctor, sure. But what keeps a family safe is the things you can't put in a vault: kindness, grit, knowing right from wrong." He nodded, eyes shining with that old gentle light I'd missed so much. I used to think Dad's greatest gift was how hard he worked. But really it was the way he never lost himself no matter what came our way. I thought about all the small lessons we'd lived year after year. How Sam and I scraped by, patching jeans and boiling chicken bones for soup. How we taught Artem to look people in the eye, to pay his debts, to say please and thank you and mean it. How I'd always told him, when something feels wrong, trust your gut, even if it hurts. Those were the things that kept us together. That was our true fortune. "You know what I want to leave you, Artem?" I asked, folding the last towel, smoothing it with my palm. "Not just money. Not even just this house. I want you to have the strength to see through what isn't real. To know that trust is the rarest thing in the world, and the most precious." He looked at me for a long moment, tears caught on his lashes. "I think I finally do, Ma. I'm sorry it took me so long." I reached over, squeezed his hand hard, the way you do when words just aren't enough. "You got there, sweetheart. That's all that matters." In that quiet room, with nothing but the tick of the old clock and the smell of laundry soap in the air, I knew I'd passed down the best of what Sam and I had built. The real legacy wasn't in the bank, but in the backbone of the boy we raised. In the courage to forgive, the wisdom to see the truth, and the kindness to keep going even when the world tries to make you hard. Money comes and goes, darling, but character, faith, and love, those are what last. Those are what I gave my son. And I saw in Artem's steady eyes that he was ready, not just to receive, but to carry it forward, for whatever and whoever came next. There comes a day in every mother's life, if she's lucky to live long enough, when she looks her child in the eye, not as the baby she once cradled, but as the grown person she's helped shape. For me, that day came on a bright Sunday afternoon, with the kitchen full of sunlight and the scent of something baking. A little cinnamon, a little hope. Artem and I had just finished breakfast, the dishes drying on the rack, when I went to the old roll-top desk in the corner. I pulled open the secret drawer, the one Sam had installed himself, clever as ever, and took out a heavy envelope, thick with documents that had rested in that darkness for years. I walked back, sat down across from my boy, and laid the envelope on the table between us. My hands were steady. My heart, for the first time in a long while, was light. "This," I said quietly, "is the truth. The whole of it." Artem looked at the envelope, then up at me. He didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he covered my hand with his warm and gentle. I trust you, Ma. Whatever's in there, I know you kept it safe for a reason. I nodded. I kept it safe for you, honey. For this family. For the memory of your father. And for the kind of life I wanted you to have, one built on honesty and love, not secrets or fear. I watched him open the envelope, watched his eyes widen as he read. The bank accounts, the deeds, the investments, all of it real this time, the sum of a lifetime's care and caution. It was more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, but what mattered most was the story behind it. Years of saving, patience, faith, and stubbornness. He finished reading, hands shaking just a little. Why now, Ma? He asked softly. I smiled, brushing his hair back with a mother's touch. Because now you understand. Not just how to hold on to something, but how to let go. How to forgive, how to see the truth even when it hurts. You're ready, Artem. Not just to inherit, but to lead. To protect what matters. To love without fear. We sat for a long time, sunlight spilling over us, the past and future resting quietly between us. Artem looked at me, eyes shining, and I saw not just my son, but my partner, my legacy, my heart scarred, yes, but whole. He reached across the table, took both my hands in his. Thank you, Ma. For everything. For never giving up on me. For loving me enough to wait for the right moment. I squeezed his hands, feeling Sam's spirit with us in that gentle kitchen. That's what family is, darling. We carry each other. We keep faith even when it hurts. And we find our way home together. Outside, the wind rustled the old maple tree. I felt peace. Deep, wide, and lasting. As if all the heartache and worry had finally settled into gratitude. My story, our story, had come full circle. The inheritance was his now, not just the money but the wisdom, the strength, the truth. And as I looked at my son, my grown, wise, beautiful boy, I knew Sam and I had done something right after all.